Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. India comes to Paris. Narendra Modi arriving this Thursday for a very special visit. India's Prime Minister is the guest of honour at the July 14th parade on the Champs Elysées. Yes, Bastille Day. There's also a night of business as ever. A deal worth over €5 billion has been agreed for India to take delivery of 26 French Rafale fighter jets. That's Elizabeth Bourne there waiting on the red carpet to greet Narendra Modi. India's Air Force already has some 63 Rafales, phasing out Russia's Sukhoi jets. Is there a change of balance as to who supplies most military hardware to India? We'll be discussing that, of course, as part of this debate. And in terms of geostrategy, there's much to discuss. Macron was put out somewhat at India's delay in condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Just where does India stand then on that issue? Just where does India stand on China? Modi perhaps seeking to see the lay of the land first, rather than take a high-handed position of a more established world power. India, after all, has a lot of shared experience with the likes of Russia and China as part of the BRICS trading bloc. Is this a new recalibration of world powers, we ask? Is there a growing south? What role does India play in that? Where does France fit in? Our panel to discuss this momentous visit with all its implications is, and let me introduce them to you in no order of preference, but we're always glad to welcome to the studio here our own Leela Jacinta, France 24's, well, it says journalist, but international affairs commentator, specialist on matters Indian, and that's just a part of your skills. Leela, great to see you, and thank you very much for being with us. We're joined by Vijay Singh, journalist, writer and filmmaker. Thank you, sir, for being with us. In New York, Salil Tripathi, who's a writer, board member and member of PEN International, joining us a little later. Who'll also be joining us later too is Ruchi Anan, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. You're there. Great. Great to see you. Thank you very much. We're with you in a moment's time. Thank you very much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Before we let the panel loose, let's take a look at how the day unfolded for Modi in Paris. This report from Nicholas Rushworth.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is guest of honour in France for 2 days that will see him attend the Bastille Day military parade. Prior to arriving, Modi said, "I am confident that my visit will provide a new impetus to our strategic partnership." Indian troops will take part in the parade on the 14th of July. There will be a flypast by Indian Air Force planes, underlining close defence ties. The Indian Defence Ministry has given the initial nod to a huge military deal with France, which would include the purchase of 26 French-built Rafale fighter jets. Human Rights Watch, among other NGOs, is questioning the decision to roll out the red carpet for Modi, arguing the Elysée is ignoring what it says should be a strategic issue for France, defending human rights in the world.
We're not asking President Macron to lecture India and Prime Minister Modi. France itself is not exemplary on human rights issues. But until now, President Macron has been completely silent on the very serious deterioration of human rights in India.
Modi, since his first election win in 2014, has been denounced by rights groups for what they say is increased discrimination and violence towards the country's Muslim minority and for stifling independent media. Reporters Without Borders ranks India as 161st out of 180 countries for press freedom.
Nicholas Rushworth here, France 24, setting the scene somewhat. Let's bring in our guests from afar, Ruchi Anan, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris, joining us from Tbilisi. Ruchi, thank you very much for being with us. I'm interested in what you see as the real stakes here for this visit, Modi and Macron, France, India. Give us your take.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, and I'm excited to have connected from my hotel room. I think there's a lot going on here. I'm as a military brat myself, really excited to see the 269 members of the Army, Navy, and Air Force marching down Champs Elysées with Sare Jahan Se Acha. We also know the history of Indian soldiers, particularly the Punjab regiment that is marching along with the contingents that took part in the First World War. Having said that, we're entering into a very, very difficult situation here with a lot at stake. Of course, there's a lot to be thrashed through. India has always been a non-aligned country ever since its independence. And now I think we are concretizing our institutional alliances, France being one of our all-time friends. whether it's been through the United Nations Security Council cracking down on us, or China, or defense and trade alliances, nuclear tests. So I think these two have really stood the test of time, despite the many, despite the new Cold War unfolding on us. So I think we're sort of sitting on the fence, but walking a really tight line.
Sitting on the fence, walking a tight line. Vijay Singh, do you agree?
Well, I don't think, this whole business of NAM, non-aligned movement, it was over with the Berlin Wall, because after that many things changed. The whole world was getting realigned after that. And so, because I was a part of, I was an Indian commentator, she suddenly brought back non-aligned movement to me. I was an Indian radio commentator, and I remember Mrs. Gandhi inviting all the NAM people at that time. But that said, what she said, something very important is, I think, which is also, I've always, in the press, I've talked about India and France having sort of somewhere a political similarity. I used to see France in Europe as in India. Because Mrs. Gandhi, despite everything, she had a bit of a socialist image around herself. Congress spoke of egalitarianism, secularism, all these ideas, and particularly anti-Americanism at that time. So, and France also had it, and so both sort of similarity. Like everyone's talking about red carpet thrown to Modi, and I suddenly think of the state dinner where Chirac invited us in 1998 or something, and that was K.R. Narayanan. It wasn't even the Indian Prime Minister. That was the first time India had blasted, they'd done nuclear tests, and France had supported they're not supported, they hadn't vetoed anything, they hadn't said anything against India. I think Chirac at that point realized that here is a country which even Mitterrand had realized before, and that is why L'Année de l'An en France was held in 1985. The Festival of India. They had identified 2-3 countries in the whole world, one on each continent, how to bring them together. But that's another part of the story. But I still think that India and France have sort of on a good wicket together. And why they're here together, I don't think I'll take your time, but they're here for a defence deal.
I like on a good wicket together. And any reference to cricket you can get in, sir, I'm very happy with that. No problem with that at all. Vijay, thank you very much indeed. We're joined now from New York by Salil Tripathi, writer, board member of PEN International, which since 1921 is the world's foremost association of writers. I thought I'd get that in for you, Salil, so we know the measure of the person who is joining us. Sir, thank you for joining us here on the France 24 debate. I don't know whether you've heard the opening remarks, but what I've been putting to people is we're seeing this France-India, Macron-Modi meeting. Is it a 50-50? Is it a meeting of minds? Are these two equals, or is one sort of like, sort of pulling the strings of the other? How do you see it?
I think France wants access to the Indian market. That's without question. India definitely wants weapons. That is also without question. And I think what India wants more than anything else, and more than India, it's Modi who wants more than anything else, are excellent photographic images, visual coverage, and television footage, which he will use next year at the election to show that he is a world leader who matters. India is going to host the G20. It was part of the meeting in Japan. Biden also rolled out the red carpet for him. So he would try to use this imagery in India, basically to show that he's truly a global leader of consequence. That's basically what the visit is about. And the symbolic importance that it's on 14 Juillet, it's on the 14th of July. That matters a lot.
Salil, we're having problems hearing you at this present moment in time. We're getting half of what you're saying just about, or certainly I am. So I'm going to try and work out whether there's a problem with us. Meanwhile, technical people will try and work out whether there's a problem coming from you. In the meantime, we'll talk with the other guests. But please, stay with us, sir. Stay with us.
Sure.
Let's bring in next Leela Jacinto. And before I let Leela loose, let me just point out to everybody she's got a series of pieces on our website, france24.com, in English, regarding this visit, what's at stake, what it happens, the context, the history, the future. Leela, over to you.
Well, to take up what has been said about the India-France relationship, a very old one. And on the communique, they talk about its 25 years of the France-India strategic partnership. Not really a household term, but extremely important. And what Vijay said was absolutely right. Multipolarity is what joins these two countries together. But part of this multipolarity is stick it to the US. France has always been a power. This comes from Charles de Gaulle, of weighing Moscow and Washington. This suited India's purpose extremely well. But the thing is, what's at stake here is as Salil says, it's a lot of arms and defense deals. Very good headline stuff, these big ticket sales. It's very good for France. These are huge imports, very good for French defense industry. Let's be clear that France is India's second largest arms supplier. And India is right now the world's largest arms importer. We're looking at bills that run into billions of euros. This essentially means that India is it's a balance of payment things. India is paying for its imports. But at the heart of the matter is, when you're talking about the Ukraine war and the fact that India was neutral, and suddenly France seems to have a problem about it. Right. Emmanuel Macron was at the UN General Assembly where he had this speech chastising countries who were neutral on Russia. And he said that neutrality is really complicity with Russian aggression, he talked about values and responsibility. So France is not very happy with the quote-unquote global South, not coming up for values. However, if France conducts a foreign policy that is just as transactional as New Delhi's foreign policy, that exposes France to the criticism of the West is hypocritical. And this is why, when the Ukraine war happened, it caught the West with utter dismay that, none of the BRICS countries came up against Russian aggression. What the world sees is that the West, lectures about democracy, and then when it comes down to hard cash, they are willing to just do transactional business. Macron is not even expected to address the human rights situation in India. Joe Biden came under tremendous pressure to bring it up. But there's a sort of an understanding that, France and India, they're equally transactional. The US and the UK as the former colonial power will talk about values and human rights, and France can just continue doing business. So that, it has a soft power cost to all this.
Indeed. Leela, thank you very much. Let's give you the good news. That is that Salil Tripathi is reconnected and with us. Coming back to you soon, sir. First, let's go back to Ruchi Anan, a professor at the American Graduate School in Paris, Indian by birth, been in France for 20 years. Father was a general in the Indian Army. So you mentioned when we first spoke that you're a military baby, so that gives us the context on that one. This deal for the Rafales, how do you read that? Clearly, this is something that's going to make France feel a lot nicer, perhaps, about the issue of India being neutral over Ukraine?
Well, I guess, like we've already said, France and India have had a partnership, military included, for a very long time. Second largest arms supplier to India. And I think this is just a series of the buys that India is doing. What I see here going on is, and I think Leela brought that up, is that India, on the one hand, not really taking a stand, but, staying with BRICS, at the same time as coming here and attending Bastille. What's going on? So that strategic partnership is beginning to look really, really suspect. And what we're seeing here is really India trying to protect its strategic and military interests vis-a-vis China that definitely plays a really crucial role for both France and India. So China, as we know, shares a 2,500 kilometers border with India. We've had wars and we've got a lot of tension on the borders as we speak. France does care about the Indo-Pacific because they actually have a lot of their exclusive economic zone in that region. So I really see this as a move to kind of have India make sure that it's not going to lose out if China really sticks with the Russian aggression. It hasn't made a stand, but I guess Prime Minister Modi has, after having been slapped on the wrist by Macron at the General Assembly, he did make a plea for peaceful resolution of conflict. But I think this amount of diplomacy starts looking sort of suspect and very strategic, with China definitely getting a really, really suspicious and a dangerous sort of response to it, as I see it.
Indeed, China, it's really hard to put a finger on where exactly China stands, although there are suspicions there are supplies going from China to Russia. Do we know exactly where India stands? Staying with you, do we know where India really stands?
In terms of the supplies from China to Russia?
In terms of the issue of Ukraine, do we know where India really stands?
I guess not. They're playing the joker the entire time. They're trying to get both sides to go. And my worry is that at the end of the day, in this new Cold War, they're going to land up perhaps losing both sides. So I think there are a lot of possible scenarios. I'm sitting here in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I've been talking at the American University here about sort of Georgia's case in Europe. And it's, the perfect case of having taken a stand all throughout the Cold War with the Warsaw Pact, and now suddenly sort of wanting to get into the EU. That's not working out. So I feel like they have less of a playing card than India obviously is, because we have the Prime Minister here at Bastille getting all the honors, but what's Russia thinking and what's China thinking? And so I think the fallout from this might be quite worrisome. India has the G20 chair for another year.
If I may just add something there. It's becoming too much of a Eurocentric view of the world, or a Westocentric view of the world. I travel a lot to India, obviously have written a lot about it. If you look at it from India, now what are the Indians saying? We all know what Putin's about, we all know what has happened in Ukraine, nobody is for him. But the Indians caught the West on their wrong foot by saying, look, if you can get your gas, how about me getting my petrol? I'm a poor country. You have ruled the world for 250 years, right? Britain has bled India to poverty till 1947. And they say, what if I can get some cheap petrol, which I can't afford anyway? I mean, that is why there's nobody who has a bold enough face to tell them.
Just to point out to people, this is Russian oil coming into India.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, it's.
No, one day somebody taught me in Libération, he said that every morning you must repeat that line. I said it yesterday. He says, but the guy has not read the newspaper today, so repeat it again.
Russian oil coming into India. That's
okay. Right. So India is buying tons of Russian oil. I don't think they're only buying stocks which are needed today. They're also buying for tomorrow.
Well, it's selling on, isn't it? Isn't that what's happening?
Sorry?
Aren't they selling on this oil?
It is selling.
Yeah, there were some talks about it.
Salil says it's selling.
No. There's a lot of sales going on. And there was a New York Times story about it a while ago. India is one of the major re-exporters of Russian oil to the West.
I saw that in The Economist as well. Please, Vijay, go ahead.
I saw it once or twice, but I haven't really followed the story, so I shouldn't be quoted on that. I want to just go back on something what you said before. These red carpets and all are fine. I've seen them several times. You must not forget that the red carpet is not just for Modi or for Indira Gandhi or for Rajiv Gandhi. It is first of all for India. And it is not just India which is looking for the US. It is the US also today for the first time which is looking for India. After China, you do not have even a rotten democratic structure where you can go with some sort of a smile and say, we want to do business with you. China is completely totalitarian, whereas India, what we used to call in the good old days backward democracy, or a shaky democracy. And here we are trying to deal with someone who at least have a situation, who at least have a constitution, where there are certain laws by which you're doing. So in that context today, India is the only market, right? Which is an economy which since the year 2001 has been growing at a mean of something like 7 to 8%, maybe the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, on the contrary, with Mr. Modi, it's gone down a bit, also because of COVID. But otherwise, it's a consistent rise. So the only country, which can afford its dreams, its armored dreams. Very sad, actually, we are talking in a world, I don't know what Western capitalism would have done if there were no wars or fear of war on this earth, because they all seem to survive on selling planes, which is rather shameful. Number two...
India survives on selling cheap Russian oil.
Just
was good for India
Just one sec. And the second thing is, how many, 700 or 800 million Indians are less than 30 years old. This is a huge manpower coming into the 21st century. So I think the West also has an agenda behind it. India, obviously, I mean, they're looking for them for transfer technology. They're looking to buy Rafale. This time it's, by the way, it's not Rafale, but it's Rafale Maritime. It's the sea, the ones which will go on the 2 aircraft carriers.
There are so many points in what you said that I want to pick up on. And I'm kind of trying to work out which one's the best one to go on, but it's fantastic. You mentioned democracy. I want to talk about that.
Your choice.
But this young population, I mean, clearly there's something here that France, I imagine, must be keen to somehow exploit in terms of transferring work, transferring technology, transferring business, creating. Leela, how do you read that?
Well, yes, of course. India is a massive market. I mean, India just passed China as the most populous country in the world. And French firms, French investments, have always looked at the Indian market. What a lot of people who are opposed to the democratic backsliding in India expect from France as a UN Security Council member is statements, right? Everybody understands that in the end, realpolitik goes on and investments have to continue, defense deals have to continue. But, are you going to at least talk the talk? And France does not. France does not speak about these human rights conditions, and Salil knows extremely well as the head of PEN on the backsliding that is happening with the freedom of the press, for instance.
Salil, that's your cue to take over, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, so I was just going to give some statistics because India has got a free ride for a very long time, being called the world's largest democracy. Essentially what it is a country that's very large, most populous, which regularly holds elections. And regularly holding elections is not the same as a democracy, because if you look at the form, yes, India has a parliament and a judiciary and a Supreme Court and constitution and so on. But the content, the soft power within it, the meaning of it has been diluted. France is all liberty, equality, and fraternity. Civil liberties, India has fallen behind on many democracy indices, whether it is deepen calling it an elected autocracy, or whether it is Freedom House calling it partly free now. If you look at equality, the Gini coefficient has worsened in the last 5 to 10 years. Definitely, you can look at the statistics there. And if you look at fraternity part of it, look at the terrible state of relations between the majority community, Hindus with Muslims and with other Christians, as it's happening right now in Manipur. Manipur has been burning for nearly 6 to 8 weeks, and there has been not one word of condemnation from the Prime Minister. There are 250 people in jail awaiting trials of peaceful dissenting academics, lawyers, writers, thinkers. 250 of them are in jail by one count. A book that is going to come out soon has statistics on that. So on democracy indices, it does do extremely poorly. And finally, Leela mentioned press freedom. Look at the Reporters Sans Frontières and their recent ranking. India is ranked 161st. Now, you can quibble that India is not so bad. India is not 161. India should be in the top 5, right? Being a democracy of such a large standing, it should be in the top 5. But it's ranked almost at the bottom of the... And that's the introspection that is needed. And if you look at the people who are criticizing India, it's not all coming from one source. You have Reporters Sans Frontières, which is neutral. There are some left-oriented organizations like Civicus in South Africa, and there are some right-wing organizations like Cato Institute, economically right-wing, who say that India falters on human freedom. So I think it's something worth bearing in mind.
Indeed. Let me just throw this out there. The whole issue, does it revolve around Narendra Modi with his style of politics, with his Hindu nationalism? Is that what it's about? Anybody, please take up on that one.
Let me just come back to that.
Go ahead.
Very quickly, because I've just spoken a lot. But India always had bad laws. India always had persecution of people. So this is not something... What is different is that the bad laws are now being weaponized, and they are being applied much more efficiently and much more strongly. Earlier, I was using this analogy with someone yesterday, that earlier the Indian government played by certain norms. They boxed you, but they had gloves on. It was Queensberry rules. Now the gloves are off, and it is bare knuckles.
Bare knuckles. Go ahead, Vijay.
I think he's raised a point there, Salil. A long time ago, a very great historian called E.P. Thompson wrote... I think it's an article, it's called The Naked State or The Secret State. Now, constitution, when you have an electoral democracy, and it's not just true of India, it is even true of Mr. Macron, for anyone, that when you have a constitution, there are always loopholes in that constitution, which you can push to a point that it doesn't look like a constitutional decision that you made, like 49.3s, ordinances coming one after the other. There's nobody to stop you from doing it, except that there'll be riots all over the place, right? So I think that is what has happened. What he's saying is that, I mean, obviously it's also tipped over sometimes democracy into unconstitutional things where the Supreme Court in India has had to step in. But what I'm trying to say by that is that democracy is certainly under strain in the country. But it's a much larger political economic problem that it was raised before 1917, that can a poor country, Marx in the 19th century, says that socialism will first come to England. And they said, my God, it's the biggest imperial country on this earth. How will it become socialist? He says it can only come to a country where you have something to distribute. You can't distribute poverty. So when countries like in India, democracy, for example, in 1947, this constitution is a wish. It's an intent. It's an oath that we want to make the country secular. We want to make the country without any caste, class, creed, blah, blah. But what is happening today is that underbelly, which we had glossed over, which we had overlooked, has rebelled. So if you do not have those means, like you are seeing now, for example, for the last 20 years that the Indian economy has grown, sometimes I wonder, obviously I believe in the figures, I'm a historian, but sometimes I wonder that around me, and I travel fairly widely in the country, I do see there's an element of prosperity around me, and even amongst the domestics, at home. So, democracy directly proportional also to economic development.
We will, so quickly, go ahead, Leela.
I mean, yes, of course. Every democracy and constitution, there's the letter and how it is kept. However, just a little pushback. When you talk about the French democracy, if there is a problem with Macron, you see the country coming to a standstill. There is absolutely the press is free. You simply cannot make those comparisons. Mostly because under Modi, it has fallen back. India was a lot freer. So I just want to push back on that. I mean, the one thing that we've got to talk about also is, when we're talking about defense, we are talking about the Indo-Pacific and China. And in that respect, we've also got to see where really does India stand with China. India is being touted very much as being the counterweight to China. And I mean, this is India's giant rival. If you look at a map, India is in a very hostile terrain. It's got Pakistan to the west, which is a close ally of China. It's got Myanmar, which is also close to China. India needs to build its arsenal. Its main rival is China, but it does not have China's weapons production capacity, which is why they are importing all this. India has had a lot of problems trying to get engines for its fighter jets, which is why Modi goes to the US. And on China, the central question is, will India be part of a Western policy? Because India has to look out for its own strategic interests. It's got this giant neighbor. It's got a memory of a war in the 1960s that it lost. It's got border skirmishes. So India will look out for its own interests. So India as a counterweight has also to be seen in the light of what exactly will India do. India is buying its own weapons, that's for sure.
Let's come to that, or continue that in a second, but take a quick look at some of the soldiers getting ready to take part in the July the 14th military parade here in Paris. Indian soldiers, another sign of this strong relationship between France and India, as well as the respect between the two leaders, Modi and Macron. Our report showing the soldiers preparing for their big Bastille Day parade.
Every day for 5 hours, troops from the Indian Ground Army, Air Force and Navy rehearse for the Bastille Day parade in Paris.
We've been practicing for more than a month, and we come early in the morning. That is just to, fine-tune certain little things, but come 14th of July, my men and my officers will be ready as they already are.
The last time India's armed forces marched in the French capital was in 2009.
Chin up, shoulder back,
But it's the first time since 1916, during World War I, that the Punjab Regiment has taken part.
Having the history of the Punjab Regiment already participated back in 1916, this is a good morale boost for me and my troops. In our style of parade, the most important aspect is Josh. Josh in English translates to fire, enthusiasm, zeal. I feel that marching in France, this Josh will be nothing less than double.
A week before the big day, the Indian troops flew to Paris. We met up with them as they were teaching a war cry to students from a French military academy. With nails on their boots for audio effect and an impressive hand swing, their style of parade is different from the French troops.
Look straight, and thereafter it's just a matter of and just like that. Quite easy, actually. A lot of times we have been approached by French almost in a sense of bewilderment as to how you are able to even achieve that. We are able to achieve that because it is a part of our basic training. It's not something that we've practiced new for this parade. This is how we march, so it comes naturally to us.
India has imported weapons and military hardware from France for decades. In the last 5 years, France has become its second largest supplier. Russia is in first place, the United States in third.
Hi, bonjour. Hello. Hi, how are you all? Good, yeah. I've heard that some of you are going to be future pilots and all of you are in the Air Force. Yes. It's nice to meet Air Force to Air Force. So I have flown a French helicopter. Do you know Aerospatial Alout? Alout 3?
Yes.
It's Alouette, yes. I've flown that for 1,200 hours, so...
That's cool.
Yeah.
India is the largest importer of arms in the world. Its strategy is to buy from a diverse range of suppliers.
How the French people believe in solidarity, fraternity. India also believes in a concept called Vasudhaiva Kutumbam. That also means world is one family. So to build our own family, make it one huge family, it is very important for us to work together with as many people as possible.
The Indian troops are leading the Bastille Day parade with zeal and plenty of josh.
Fantastic voices there. Before we bring in Ruchi in Tbilisi, quick word from VGA. You made a film about the Punjab regiment that fought in the First World War.
No, I made a film called Farewell, My Indian Soldier, on the Indian soldiers who came on the Western Front in 1914. It's even today, despite the success of the film, nobody knows. I mean, you yourself said it. 140,000 soldiers came to France only on the Western Front, of which 7,000 died. Now, on the world, if you take all the theatres, war theatres everywhere, in the First World War, 1.4 million Indians took part in the First World War. And they were there on the second day of the front lines. She said, with nails on their shoes. I had tears in my eyes when she said that, because these soldiers came here. Now you should know the other side of the world, what the West did. Without any footwear, without any warm clothing. They were sent on the first day of the war, right? They faced the first chemical weapons in the world. They didn't exist in history before.
Mustard gas, yes.
They were called they were called Ypres. Why Ypres? Because they were in Ypres at that time. Christopher Nolan made the film on Dunkirk when he made that. So, well, I mean, what can I say? You set me off.
You've given us that insight, which is great.
Yeah,
Thank you,
but
sir.
my film is about, if I can just take 1 minute, you see, when soldiers were sent behind to rest and repose, they, on furlough, they went to the barns where there was nobody except women, because men had gone to war. So there was a soldier who met a French woman, and she fell pregnant, and this guy was sent back to the war. And she discovered many months later that she had a baby. And in my film, the great-great-granddaughter of this child travels through India, Belgium, France, England, blah, blah, and around this search, in search of the great-great-grandfather, around this search is the whole documentary.
Sounds lovely, absolutely lovely. Ruchi Anan in Tbilisi from the American Graduate School in Paris. Let's get back to Macron and Modi. How do you see it developing when the two sit down face to face? What will they say to each other?
What would they say to each other? I'm guessing they're going to crack the deal. I wanted to actually go back a little bit to what's been brewing with what Vijay and Leela said. And as a theorist of international relations, I can't help but break it into at least two levels, because I think all of this stuff that we talk about, militaries and Rafales and balance of power and polarity in the international system and the Russia-Ukraine war informing all of that, is sort of one discussion of like high-level politics, and then a very important and interesting question to be raised about democracy more at the state level. And over there, I wanted to sort of just make a comment about how democracy in general is in crisis, whether you look at the United States and all that we're seeing happening there, with their numbers also going down, their rankings going low. France hasn't had any fewer problems. So I really think that democracy is in crisis. And we're actually focusing on really mundane things like the sales of Rafale and India-French relations, rather than actually looking at the bigger picture of the Sustainable Development Goals and COP28 coming up. So it's really frustrating to have sort of this be the showcasing of all of media, when in fact there's so much else to chew through. And I think Vijay and Leela both raised that. So it's unfortunate, but that, like you said, is so the westernization of international relations that boils down to, Prime Minister Modi coming, shaking hands. And that's so the tip of the iceberg when you talk about, Indo-French relations, or for that matter, regional or international politics. So I just wanted to add that.
Ruchi, I couldn't agree more. Leela's got more to add, I know. Go ahead.
May I? I mean, there is a post-colonial debate, holding the old European powers, saying that the world is Eurocentric, etc. This is an argument that is made now when it's convenient. And when it is not convenient, India is the fifth largest economy in the world. It is rising, etc. Let's look at climate change. Right now, as we speak, the biggest emitters among the world are the US, India, and China. And yes, of course, history has done badly by the colonized countries, but it's also been more than 70 years of independence with India. What are these countries doing in terms of climate? As Ruchi says, a very important issue. Now, if you're going to hide behind the global south, which is just a massive concept. This includes, Pacific Islands, this includes Sub-Saharan Africa, but it also includes some pretty large economies. And so, the discourse on what climate change is very much, somehow the North has to keep paying for the South, which it must. But in the last COP20, we did not have any deals, any agreement on carbon emissions. We had an agreement on funds. So now it's all about the money. But in the end, we have one world. And everybody has to do their bit. And if you are still producing coal, if you are still if you're still onto fossil fuels, you can't have it both ways.
Indeed, biggest refinery in the world is in India, isn't it? That's the biggest oil refinery in the world is in India. That's where all the Russian oil is coming into.
Yeah,
as I understand it. Let's bring in Salil Tripathi in New York, board member of Penn International. I sense you're looking to get in, so over to you.
No, I just wanted to say that what she was saying about environment is absolutely justified. And just to build on what Leela was saying, coal. Not only is India a major producer, but also an importer and a user. Indian companies are going to be making more and more energy. Coal that will be burned in India will send energy to Bangladesh if the deal finally goes through. And one of the leading players in that sector, we have to accept, and we have to accept the reality, is a business group that is very close to Prime Minister Modi, the Adani Group. And of course, they also have green technology, so it's not as if they're not. But you're absolutely right, Leela, in pointing out that you can't have it both ways. And there is a bit of that going on, that on one hand, India wants to get the West to own up for what it has done, but wants to continue in a business as usual manner about what it is doing with its own emissions.
Salil, you're saying that the West should be helping India and other countries transition? Is that what it's about?
Yeah, of course. I mean, they should be helping, but countries which are better off and wealthy should also be paying for it themselves. I completely agree that the Pacific Islands and Caribbean islands are in a very special case. A landlocked country in Africa is in a very special case. But India has enormous sunshine. It has potential for hydropower. It has a lot of potential for alternative energies. And whether it is doing enough in that regard remains an open question.
Are you hoping that there'll be some kind of conversation between Macron and Modi that might go towards unlocking that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the whole big question then becomes, what to do with nuclear energy and where does India want to play a role there or not. And I think there, because the kind of conditions that India wants in place about transfer of technology and reusing the replenished fuel, that is one reason why the US and India did sign an accord, and it didn't go much further after that, because the kind of liability clauses that India wanted in place, because of the unfortunate experience India had had with Bhopal, which was not a nuclear disaster, but a disaster nonetheless, that has stalled the deals there. So I think there's going to be a lot of, as you say, as the English phrase goes, the devil will be in the details.
Indeed, Bhopal, Union Carbide disaster, one of the most worst natural disasters.
I was there.
You were actually there?
Yeah. I mean, I arrived 24 hours after that. But well, what can I say?
Well, it's one of these things, isn't it? And often we see, obviously,
look at the way the Western firms got away with it. I mean, Anderson, that guy, was sitting right there.
You took the words out of my mouth.
For 20 years, and nobody caught him, and they said, we don't know where he is. I mean, there's so much. You see, I think Ruchi raised a good point, that democracy all over the world, is dwindling, it's sacking. The whole energy, the democratic principles are deteriorating everywhere. And that is a good debate to have. None of us have even raised the question, where the hell do you need these arms?
Yeah, absolutely.
One Rafale is 10,000 hospitals. The whole world is dying. What does India have to do with Pakistan? What does Pakistan have to do with India or China?
Yeah.
They're all rotting away in poverty.
Let Rishi have
we don't even question this whole point.
It's an extremely good point. Let Rishi come in on that. Go ahead, Rishi.
Yeah, I just wanted to, piggyback on what was just said by Vijay and move this discussion to multinational corporations. So what we see on, television and every news coverage is about states and heads of states doing their thing. But in fact, behind that are the war profiteers, are the multinational corporations that are sitting quite silently. And unfortunately, they're not even subjects of international law. We're still not cracking down on their responsibility. Vijay, you mentioned Bhopal. Leela, you raised the issue of Annex 1 and Annex 2 countries. India and China sitting in Annex 2 countries, having more time to go ahead and, fulfill the requirements of Kyoto Protocol and the subsequent treaties thereof. Those are the discussions to be had. And I really would like to zoom in on multinational corporations, because in all of this, whether it's the images we're seeing behind of India, the slide in democratic values, war and where all the money is going when Russia and Ukraine is burning, when India is getting involved, someone's having a really good time. And those are the multinational corporations, name it, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. They're the ones that's silently sitting there, I mean, I said it.
Indeed, Ruchi, thank you very much indeed. Leela, I'll give you the final say. I mean, clearly you mentioned at least one French company which is cashing in on all of this.
Yes, before you go, I have to say the one thing that was kind of unusual about Modi's visit this time, and I'm sorry to go back to these leaders.
Go ahead.
But what it was unusual is that, the press coverage in France, one, and two, the fact that there has been, noises about Modi's human rights track record in France. When Modi was in the US last month, Biden was under tremendous pressure to bring this up. And traditionally, the Indian community is very small in France, but not so. So, this is being viewed by people across the world. They are aware that their leaders are as Ruchi says, they're making big deals, etc. But, people are looking at these values. So the French media this time, Le Monde, the leading French daily, was asking questions about, why this privilege to Narendra Modi? Why now? Why not after the election next year in 2004? There were also French Green politicians who were asking about this. And the European Parliament today actually asked Macron to address the issue of what's happening in the northeastern state of Manipur. This is sort of unusual for this to happen in France.
Indeed. And as we're talking, demonstration going on at the Esplanade des Invalides, people saying that this is wrong, that Modi should be welcome to France in this way. Again, another sign that people in France, whether they're Indian, whether they're French, waking up to this sense that something isn't right, this idea that democracy perhaps is under threat. And as you were saying, Ruchi, that's one of the sort of serious things that we're looking at here, this idea that democracy is under threat. And Ruchi, final comment from you about that?
I mean, I guess, when asked, I'm not sure I have answers, but I think one of the obvious things to be doing there is to really bringing in all the actors, like I mentioned, the multinational corporations in the forefront of it. Somehow I just feel that it's really the economics that are driving wars and people. A famous book by Richard Kaufman called War Profiteers. And you see that play out every day, whether it's in the environmental crisis, whether it's human rights, whether it's Islamophobia, whether, I don't know. I just feel like I think that's where this discussion should be going, about asking some really important questions, and not just from the third world or the less developed countries, but from countries like France that seems to hush it up, or countries like the United States that has also got a huge role to play and lots of explaining to do in the kinds of human rights violations we're seeing. So I guess I won't add more than that.
Ruchi, you've put it out there, and we're grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid we're out of time, and I'm being told off for going on for too long. So I'm sorry, Salil, I couldn't get back to you. Ruchi, thank you. That's Ruchi Anan, Professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. Thanks to Salil Tripathi from Penn International. Thanks to Vijay Singh, journalist, writer and filmmaker. And thanks to our very own Leela Jacinto, our international affairs commentator. Thank you all for taking part. Thank you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.